Okay, so, today we've got a pretty heavy topic, actually. You've brought some stuff that suggests a kind of disturbing trend. A lot of it coming from, looks like a Timcast IRL video on YouTube.
Right, yeah. So the stuff you sent over is really focused on what they're calling an increase in these swatting incidents. And specifically, they seem to be targeting people who, identify as conservative. And then there's other stuff too, like all the vandalism against Tesla, dealerships and cars. And they kind of tie all that into this whole politically charged thing.
Yeah, yeah. So just so everyone's clear, the main thing we're looking at here is this transcript from the YouTube video, right?
Yeah.
They're going through a bunch of these incidents and, kind of trying to analyze them, So what we're going to try to do is break it down, see what exactly is being said, and then maybe pull out some of the main ideas, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So let's start with these swatting incidents because they're pretty scary, right?
Right.
And the transcript, it jumps right in with a few specific examples.
Yeah, so right off the bat, they're talking about a report from Alpha News, and it's about this raider in Minnesota, Dustin Grage. He's identified as conservative, and apparently he was targeted in one of these swatting incidents. And they really quote him in the transcript. He says, "We're pulling a dozen officers off the road from patrols to be able to do this fake SWAT that might kill somebody."
Oh,
Which really, it emphasizes how serious this is. Like, we're talking potential danger to people, not just, a prank or something. And also how it can, misuse law enforcement resources.
totally. And then right after that, they mentioned Joe Pags, the talk show host,
Yeah.
and how, he was also apparently swatted. But then it gets even crazier, right? They bring up this story from Larry Taunton.
Yeah, Larry Taunton. So he describes waking up, middle of the night, his dog's going crazy, and then he sees these armed guys, like full body armor, on his property. It's like something out of a movie, right?
Yeah, intense.
Yeah.
And the police, when they finally explained what's going on, they said they got this report of a shooting at his house, but it was totally bogus.
So a completely made up call, right?
Seems that way, yeah. And what's really interesting is, in the transcript, Taunton says something like, "I doubt any voted for Biden or Kamala." So he's already thinking about this, in a political way.
Right, right.
And then he goes even further. He says, "This was an attempt to get me and my wife killed."
Whoa.
Yeah, so he's really convinced that this was, a targeted attack because of his political views.
Okay, yeah. And then they keep going. All right, the transcript mentions bearded vet as another possible swatting victim, and then Matt Van Swol too. It's like the list just keeps growing.
Yeah. Tim Pool in the video, he even mentions this number, like something like 18 incidents in a really short period of time.
Right.
He's referring to this post he saw on Twitter from this guy they call a data Republican. Apparently he was tracking all these reports.
Oh, wow. 18. That's a lot.
Yeah. And they actually mentioned that the time frame he's talking about is UTC +2, coordinated universal time +2 hours. So it's not exactly clear, like what specific time frame we're talking about. Depends where you are, I guess.
Okay, yeah. But still, 18 incidents in a short time. That's scary.
Absolutely. And there's another thing that's worth noting. A lot of the people mentioned by name, like Garage, Pags, Taunton, they're all pretty active on Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it now.
Yeah, that's true.
Makes you wonder if there's a connection, like if being, outspoken on that platform, especially if you lean a certain way politically, makes you a bigger target for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. And they also talk about the possibility that, maybe bigger organizations like, say, Fox News or the Daily Wire or even politicians, maybe they don't always report every single incident that happens.
Right. They mentioned that could be because of, security protocols they already have in place, or maybe they're worried about, making things worse by publicizing it, like encouraging more of this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I could see that.
So, when you think about it, it's quite possible that the number we're seeing, the reported incidents, it could just be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. But, this isn't the first time swatting has made headlines,
Yeah.
right? The transcript mentions those two really tragic cases with Andrew Finch and Mark Herring.
Right. And they died as a result of swatting, which is just horrible.
Absolutely. But the transcript is quick to point out that those cases, the motives were different, right?
Yeah, so with Finch, it was apparently something to do with a gaming dispute. And with Herring, it was about trying to steal his Twitter handle. Awful stuff, but different from what they're saying is happening now.
Yeah, because in this wave of swatting, as the source is presenting it, it's being framed as specifically politically motivated.
Right, exactly.
And I got to say, looking at the pattern, who's being targeted. It does seem like there could be something to that. Like, this isn't random. It feels like a deliberate escalation.
I mean, it's definitely a cause for concern, but, gotta be careful too, right? Like, just because these accounts are out there, can we really say for sure that every incident is driven purely by politics?
That's a good point.
I mean, the fact that a lot of these individuals are so active on, one particular platform, maybe there's some other, common thread there. I think we need more than just these anecdotes to say for sure that this is a coordinated political attack.
Yeah, you're right. We should be cautious about jumping to conclusions without more concrete evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on. The transcript also brings up a bunch of other stuff like the vandalism against Tesla, right?
Right. And they don't waste any time connecting that to, woke activists. At least that's what the Daily Mail excerpt says, the one they're referencing in the transcript. And they mention this really disturbing detail about someone actually setting themselves on fire as part of these protests. Like, that's taking things to a whole new level.
Yeah, wow.
And then they bring up this Reddit post where you have Tesla owners basically putting stickers on their cars saying they bought them before, Elon Musk went crazy.
Seriously?
Yeah, like they're trying to distance themselves from him publicly.
I mean, you can't blame them, I guess, if they're worried about their cars getting vandalized.
Right. It's like there's this, I don't know, a cultural backlash against Elon Musk or something, and they're kind of interpreting this vandalism as, like an extension of that.
Yeah.
And then they make this comparison in the transcript to what was happening in Oakland during the Summer of Love, where businesses were putting up signs asking not to be harmed. They're using that to say, look, this is what happens under a communist dictatorship.
Whoa, that's a pretty loaded comparison.
It is, right. And to be clear, that's how they're framing it in the transcript.
Right, of course. Okay, then they shift gears again and start talking about Bill Burr.
Yeah, the comedian.
Yeah, and they're focusing on his free Luigi comments, where he was apparently, like, echoing those calls to harm a specific CEO.
Right.
And then they bring up that statement he made on his podcast advocating for lethal force against billionaires.
Yeah, so they're pointing out that there wasn't a huge backlash, after he said those things.
Right, like no one really called for him to be canceled or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Which they find weird, especially compared to how things were handled in the past.
Right, yeah.
And then right after that, they talk about Hassan Piker and that threat he made against Rick Scott, the senator.
Right, which got him temporarily banned from Twitch.
Yeah. But what they seem more focused on is the lack of condemnation from, certain politicians.
Like AOC, yeah.
And the fact that CNN still gives him a platform.
Right. So again, they're suggesting this double standard based on, where you stand politically.
And honestly, it does kind of feel like more and more this kind of aggressive rhetoric is becoming, I don't know, accepted, or at least people aren't as quick to condemn it as they used to be.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But we got to be careful about lumping everyone together, Like saying the entire left is behind this stuff, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, you're right. Painting with such a broad brush doesn't really get us anywhere.
Exactly. There's a huge diversity of opinions within any political group.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the bigger ideas that the transcript is trying to get at. One of the more, intense claims is that the left basically operates on the principle of there is no truth but power.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
Right. Like they're suggesting that for the left, it's all about getting and keeping power, and truth doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's how it comes across.
Okay, then they start talking about standpoint theory and how, feminists have used it, and they tie that into the whole, killing the patriarchy thing and the idea of removing masculinity.
Right.
And then they connect that to, the attacks on figures like Trump.
So they're essentially saying that this academic theory has led to, this real-world political animosity.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to follow that logic.
Yeah, standpoint theory is pretty complex, and, reducing it down to this idea that it's all about, destroying traditional power structures is a bit simplistic.
Yeah, and then they point out this contradiction, right? Like, the left supposedly cares so much about climate change, but then you have all this vandalism against Teslas, which are, electric vehicles.
Right. They're saying, well, if you really want to promote green technology, why attack the people who are buying those cars?
Yeah, it doesn't really add up.
Unless, of course, the real motivation is something else. Like maybe it's more about, going after Elon Musk specifically.
Right, yeah. And then the last thing they bring up is this study by Jim McNeil.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the one that supposedly found that over 75% of mass media portrays men negatively.
Yeah, they use that to kind of support their idea that there's this wider cultural effort to undermine traditional masculinity.
Right. But we have to be careful about taking any single study, as the absolute truth.
Exactly. We need to know more about, how the study was conducted, who they surveyed, things like that.
Right, exactly. But even if that number is accurate, it does suggest something is going on with how men are being portrayed in media.
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
Okay, so if we take a step back and look at everything in this Timcast IRL transcript, it seems like they're painting a pretty dark picture, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
there's this rising tide of political hostility and basic social norms are breaking down.
Yeah, that's the overall impression they give. And they see these swatting incidents, the vandalism, the aggressive rhetoric, they see it all as connected, part of this bigger trend.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, at the same time, we have to be critical, right? Like just because they present things in a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way to interpret what's happening.
Absolutely. We can't just take their word for it. We need to think for ourselves, look for more information, and maybe consider other explanations.
Right.
And we got to be cautious about, making sweeping generalizations about entire groups of people based on the actions of a few.
Okay, so to recap, in this deep dive into the Timcast IRL transcript, we covered a lot. We talked about these reported swatting incidents targeted at individuals who identify as conservative. We explored the idea that this might be a deliberate, politically motivated pattern, but also the need for more evidence to really confirm that. We looked at the vandalism against Tesla, which the source connects to woke activism. We discussed some pretty aggressive rhetoric from public figures and the seemingly uneven consequences they faced. And we also looked at those broader interpretations about power dynamics and the supposed attack on traditional values.
Right. And it boils down to this. Is there really a coordinated campaign of harassment and intimidation targeting conservatives? Or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And we have to think about what all of this means, for the state of our political discourse. Like, is this online anger spilling over into the real world? And what role do individuals and these online platforms play in either escalating or calming things down?
Yeah, those are the real questions we need to be asking ourselves.
Well, that's something for everyone to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.